People of the internet, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's raining outside west of Paris. So I will present to you the exhibition that we've done called France en Antarctique, France in Antarctica. So about the French polar expeditions from 1947 to 1987, yes. So what the exhibition is about and why it is possible. You have to go back in 2023, where a woman named Simone Weiller passed away, sadly, and she worked in the French polar expeditions for 40 years, and this is why the exhibition is from 47 to 87. After she passed away, her family, of which one of the family members is called Amélie Landais, who's my boss, and who had the idea to do the exhibition, went into her apartment to clean everything up, and they find lots and lots and lots of documents, archives that had been preserved and accumulated throughout these 40 years, and even like beyond that, of her time working in the French polar expeditions. And so the idea was, well, it might tell a different story, not like a radically different story of the one that we already know of, but from a different point of view, different perspective. This perspective would be through a filter of all the people that have worked for the French polar expeditions, and not only the explorers, and not only the scientists, because these are the people that we think of when we think about exploring Antarctica. And specifically like a specific time period, which is like the beginning of the 20th century, with like the Scott Amundsen for like the race for the South Pole, but also maybe more famously even Shackleton for how he survived with his crew on the ice pack in just before the First World War, if I recall correctly. So these are the people that we think of, like great heroes, great explorers, but at least during like the second part of the 20th century, and when the French polar expeditions became an organization and not only like a side quest for the French government, a lot of new jobs appeared, let's say, and became crucial to, well, just making the expeditions possible, but also making them safe. And this is something that is really important, even if like the first ones, when you look at the stories, they weren't that safe. It was like pretty precarious, let's say. But in the idea, there are like hundreds of people that have worked on these expeditions that we've never heard of, but were so important. And this is what we're going to try to tell, like it's an homage to these people in a certain sense. And Simone Weiller was part of those people. She is a French person of like Jewish descent and belief. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because, just before 47, which is the beginning of the French polar expeditions, there was the Second World War. And during the Second World War, she fled, first Paris, because she came from there, and after fleeing from Paris, she arrived at Clermont-Ferrand, in which she did part of her studies as a young teenager. And because of, the collaboration that France and many other countries are sadly known for, with the Nazis, she fled to Switzerland after that. And after the Second World War, she came back to Paris. She landed a job in the French polar expeditions in 1947. When I first came, I acquainted myself with the archives that we exhibit. First thing shocked me, quite truly. You don't feel that there was a Second World War like just 2 years ago. There was a sentence that I came across from Simone Weiller herself in a little document that should appear again somewhere on the screen, which is like the equivalent of her curriculum that she, I don't know in what circumstances she gave it or wrote in it, but she talks about the studies that she did. She did literature, apparently, studies, and other little activities, social activities, and also in Clermont-Ferrand. And then there's a little sentence. It's like between two lines. She had forgotten to write part of it. So I don't know what to make of it, but it was it's eerie. And the sentence is the following: studies halted because of the events. And it's a small thing, it's a small maybe it doesn't mean much, but when you know what everything that has happened during these dark years, you cannot not stay passive in front of this surviving trace of people acknowledging what just has happened. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the exhibition. The story of the exhibition is an onion. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there are so many layers to go through and to arrive at where we are today. So there's a specific structure, the structure of the exhibition that I'm going to follow, that maybe have like the different stages that we'll go through. But to introduce you to the story of Antarctica, we have to go back, quite surprisingly, in Greek antiquity. But there was this belief that held throughout the centuries that there was something at the southern tip of the world, right? And so centuries later, after the discovery of the Americas, there were people, like in the 17th century, 18th century, that were convinced, or at least hoped, that they would find something at the southern tip of the earth. And not, I mean, of course, the icy lands that we know of today, but fertile lands, exploitable lands that they could use, like, and add it to the long list of colonized spaces, and for example, the Americas. So we have lots of different, let's say, explorers that arrived around it and thought that they had discovered like the new continent, but quite often it was just like an island, which is the case, for example, at I don't know how to say it in English actually. I mean, Patagonia at the southern tip of America, or South America, and there are several accounts of these types of things happening, and quite late on. And the reason why, at some point, because of a guy named Cook, which is he's a famous explorer that has like literally been all around the earth, all around the globe, also tried to find it, and at apparently 100 kilometers of the coast, he was blocked by something that has blocked everybody for, like, even to this day, is a problem to access Antarctica and the coast, is the ice pack. And the ice pack is like, so ice flows, but not only, so a very, very thick layer of ice surrounding the continent on hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. And so he had managed, Cook, to go 100 kilometers offshore of Antarctica, but it was so thick that he had to turn back. And so he was just like, no, there's no continent over there. Just forget it. There's nothing to see there. And so people rolled with it, and this is why the fabled continent, the name that it had was Terra Australis, Terra Australis. And so this is why Australia has its name, because since they didn't find like this fabled land, they were just like, well, I guess we can give it to the biggest island that we have on the south of the earth, I guess. And so Australia got its name. So when we discovered Antarctica, we are in the 19th century. One of the first guys to do so is Jules Dumont d'Urville. And Jules Dumont d'Urville, a French marine officer, and he managed to see with his own eyes and with his crew the coast of Antarctica. But he didn't go on the coast. He didn't set foot on the land of Antarctica. And despite this, they still said it was... Like, it's such a weird story when you think about it. The story is, so he was on his boat, on his ship, Dumont d'Urville, and it's not even him. Like, they saw some like rocky islands near the coast, so it wasn't the coast itself, and they just sent the crew like on this rocky island. They put down the flag. We have like a drawing made from one of the people, like a surgeon that belonged to the crew, so he was there. At least he was like in the surrounding area when it happened. So we have this drawing that is on a postcard. They tell the story of how they arrived, like after rowing for 2 hours. So after getting off the ship, to this little rocky island where they put all the penguins that were living there, so into the sea. I don't know why they did it, but they did it. And this is the story. These are accounts written directly by the crew, mind you. I'm not like saying apparently it's like this. No, this is their own. They are testifying in their own words, and And so they put the penguins apparently like so into the sea, and they put down their flag, and they say, "Oh, how lucky are we that we can like claim this land without any war and without deporting anybody who could live there." Like at this point, specific point, they have no idea what's on the continent. They just see it from afar. They know that there's a continent now, but like, I mean, crazy times. They discover this territory that Dumont d'Urville calls Adélie Land. The reason why it's Adélie is because it's after the name of his wife, so Adèle Dumont d'Urville, and they call it today. And so in 1840, I don't know if I had given you the date, in 1840, so Adélie Land is discovered and claimed by France. And now we can go fast forward more than a century after this. And why, Gabriel, that means that nothing happened during this century? You're completely right. Nothing happened. Literally nothing happened. There's a famous commander, le commandant Charcot, who has returned to Antarctica between in the 1920s, closer to the peninsula southern of South America, right? But nobody has gone back to Adélie Land, at least French people, since then. Nobody. So now we are in 1946. And what happens in 1946? Three French guys, after the Second World War, are exploring Spitzberg. Spitzberg is an island, Norwegian territory in the North Pole, right? And they come back to France, and to come back to France, they make a stop in Oslo. And in Oslo, in apparently a rainy day, they find a soaked newspaper in the street. There's an article. And this article says, I mean, not the following lines, but you'll get the idea. France in Antarctica, it's been more than a century. Nobody's going there. Maybe Norway can claim it. Basically, that's what is said. And so these three guys, Martin, Valette, and Pommier, well, they say maybe it would be a good idea if we got back to Antarctica. And so I don't think it was out of national pride or something like that, or responsibility. Even like if it was like after the Second World War, so maybe it was, I do not know. But I mean, surely they were quite excited at the idea of maybe exploring Antarctica. I think they were like hyped as hell to go there. And so they tried to convince the French government, but not alone, with the help of a certain man, which is quite well known in France at least, called Paul-Émile Victor. Paul-Émile Victor, picture surely somewhere there, was a French explorer, but also, more importantly, was an ethnologist in the North Pole, specifically in Greenland, to study the local indigenous populations of Greenland, which he apparently had built like some very close ties before going to Antarctica and living far from the icy waters in Polynesia, French Polynesia. So this is the man that we're talking about, which reason why he's so well known is that he has a huge body of work, of which like a lot of he has a lot of drawings that he has done throughout his life, and these drawings are, some of them at least, I mean, impressions that are printed on the postcards, are exhibited in the exhibition, so a few examples or so. And so he did a lot of these drawings, and these helped a lot with a lot of conferences he had done also I mean, he was a science communicator in a certain sense. He was a great communicator, and so the greater public was aware of what France was doing in Antarctica and North Pole, and so he's one of the main reasons why we know of, at least of some of the activities, because he worked a lot in this area, and the reason why he did this was because he needed funds for the organization that he co-created called the French Polar Expeditions. And to have these funds, well, one of the better things to do is to talk about it and to show how important it is. And so these drawings were, at least in my opinion, were a great way to do it, because the greater public could more easily access to what was happening there. Anyways, thanks to Paul-Émile Victor, the French Polar Expeditions are created. So now we are in 1947. 1947, Simone Weiller is back. She's back in Paris, and she lands a job in the French Polar Expeditions. Already, in the first year, they're organizing everything possible so that they can go back to Antarctica in 1948. And they failed. They failed for a very interesting reason, is because of the same reason why Cook previously didn't manage to go to Antarctica? The ice pack surrounding the Antarctic continent. Same thing, same problem, and we still have like this problem today. If the pack is too thick, cannot do. You can't go to Antarctica. So now there are planes, of course, but still, like, a lot of different things go from by boat. But we'll talk about this later. First expedition that managed to go to Antarctica was the one of 4950, led by André-Franck Lyotard, which picture also nice picture actually, of him with a chin strap penguin. They managed to do this, and they landed in a natural port called now Port Martin, which is not used anymore because it burned to the ground. And why Port Martin? Because, so maybe you remember the name, there were 3 guys that wanted to go back to Antarctica, Valette, Pommier, and Martin died during the second trip. What is Antarctica exactly? Everything I thought I knew about Antarctica, I mean, not everything, but like a lot of it has been proven to be false. The first thing I thought was that it was a flat desert with nothing going on. I mean, mostly. I knew there was wildlife, but I thought it was quite empty. And it is in a certain sense. The second thing I thought was that it was a silent continent. And these two things are terribly wrong. The first thing is most of the wildlife is on the coast. And what is the wildlife of Antarctica? It's a lot of birds, but not only flying birds, also emperor penguins, Adélie penguins. I mean, talking about Adélie land specifically here, because I don't know for the other parts of Antarctica, but Adélie land has mostly these individuals, but also things living in the sea, like sea leopards, for example, which is the apex predator you can find full-time there. Sometimes there are orcas coming by, but only when the ice pack lets them, but mostly it's sea leopards. And sea leopards are a hellish type of animal. When you see it like this in a picture, maybe you won't realize it if you see it on the beach, but this little monster right here, little monster 3 to 5 or 6 meters. After this, there are seals, like weddell seal, crab-eater seal, so there are things living there, but it's still a horrible environment to live in. And so the reason why I said I was wrong about imagining the continent as a flat thing, there's a plateau in Antarctica. Yes, there are mountains also. There's a mountain range called Antarctica, but also there are so many crevices, and there are
Sastrugi.
It's a Russian word for the wind that erodes the ice of the plateau, and so by eroding it, it forms straight lines of a few centimeters high, but sometimes more than a meter, which creates this very particular landscape. Don't think that you just can go in a straight line and just go from one point to the other. That's not possible. And after that, problem of the sound, the problem of what you hear in Antarctica. If you think that you can just like hear nothing, no, you hear the wind, because winds in Antarctica are especially violent. Basically, they are the winds that you can find in the sea that are violent because there are no land masses that can block the winds around the continent, so the wind can be carefree about its way. On the continent, these are chathmatic winds that descend from the higher plateau. This is Antarctica. It's a noisy place. It's a noisy place because of the winds, and when you're in mating season, then you hear all the birds, hundreds and thousands in numbers. This can be quite loud. And then after that, in the first years at least, there were dogs. There were sled dogs. And sled dogs are a noisy bunch, to say the least. So there's that also. So this is what you'll find in Antarctica. I hope I've shown you like several pictures that we have, photographs of the wildlife that is there. And Simone Weiller, the lady that we talked about before, that all the archives that we have come from her, had a lot of pictures mostly of penguins. I don't know why, but I mean, they are quite the cute kind, aren't they? So a lot of pictures of penguins, but not only. There's a funny picture, for example, of like a guy reading a comic book in English. I don't remember the name. It's like De Goethe or something like that. It's called, in France it's called Gaston Lagaffe. So reading it like next to 2 weddell seals, which I find quite funny, honestly. But other than that, like, this is most of the wildlife that you can find there. And also, like, there's all the underwater wildlife of like starfish, krill, a lot of different animals that are, in their case, it's quite silent, except if there's like a weddell seal or other animals that pass by and do some noise, which are like alien-like noises. I truly recommend you try to go and listen to the different noises that are in Antarctica. It's very, very special. Like, very, very special. Antarctica has stations. And the first, like, big French station was built for the AGI, so the International Geophysical Year, where scientists from countries that had territory in Antarctica, so Australia, France, the Soviet Union, the US, sent scientists to study all together on the continent. And so Dumont d'Urville Station, which still exists today and is, I think, like the main station, surely the main station on the coast of Adélie, has been built. So several pictures again through the decades, because with evolving technologies, more and more people and more scientists and more mechanics and more logistic people came to the continent. And Station Dumont d'Urville in the summer, when most of the people can be found, are like around 100 people, which is a lot. And then in the winter, I think it's like more around 30 people, something like that, which is still a lot, but you can't go do more for logistic reasons and security reasons, safety reasons. How do you prepare an expedition and how do you come to Antarctica? The first years of the French polar expeditions, so since 47, it was hosted by Paul-Émile Victor in his own private family flat. There weren't many people working at the French polar expeditions at this time, but still, this is not a great place to work. And so quite quickly, but still a few years after, from 52 to 92, they had a new home, let's say, and this new home for the French polar expeditions was Avenue Maréchal Fayol in Paris, next to the Bois de Boulogne, which were the former Secret Service building before, and it was rented at a low price by the city of Paris to the French polar expeditions. And once they had finally a true place to work, it wasn't another house or another set of offices. We have a drawing of the house and all the different rooms in which they worked and what the rooms were for. You can see that on the ground floor, all the administration offices are there, the people answering calls, taking care of accounting and all this stuff. And then you have two different floors underground. That's where you see all things related to food, things related to material, things related to health, the craftsmanship, the garage. Everything is underground. And also the weasels, which are like trucks used by Paul-Émile Victor first in the North Pole and then used in the South Pole. You have all these things happening where you can't imagine that they only have scientists and explorers to do that. So there's all these different jobs that were there and working on site in Paris, that if they weren't there, again, I'm repeating myself, I know, but it is important I stress that, without them, no expeditions, at least of how we know of them. Now that you can prepare an expedition, now that the expedition is correctly prepared, that nothing is forgotten, because if you don't have enough food, if you don't have enough material, then you'll die. Like simply, I could say it more lightly, but this is the reasons why, for example, the Scots expedition, if I'm not wrong, in the 20s failed when they tried to reach the South Pole, where they arrived at the South Pole, and then when they tried to go back, well, they had food, but they didn't have the right type of food. So they didn't have the right calories, they didn't have the right vitamins, and so they just literally starved to death. This is what's going to happen to people if they go unprepared to Antarctica, right? So the whole crew of people, maybe there were 5 or 6, they all died, and mostly because of starvation. This is what's at stake here. How do you come to Antarctica? And how do you come to Antarctica? You go there by ship. Even today, again, I've talked to you about now you can take the plane to Tasmania and south of Australia, then take a ship from there to Antarctica, but mostly you go by ship. The reason why is because I talked to you about the violent winds that you have in the Southern Ocean, but also you need to land the plane. And how do you land the plane when there's no airplane lane? Well, you cannot, simple as that. And it is possible, but the Americans do this and did this at least, and I'm going to talk to you about this later. But in French capacity, ship is the preferred commuting transport system, let's say. So we have, as you might guess, several pictures of ships in the archives that we have, so that I can show you here, and that were extremely important because, even if we could technically use the plane, we couldn't, but even if we could, like all the tons and tons of material and food that you had to transport to the coast, you're not going to do this by plane. So you use a ship. During this trip, well, you have seasickness, and there's a type of passenger that you wouldn't expect to have seasickness, and these are dogs. And I talk about the dogs because we have some pictures of dogs in the archival fund, legacy fund, but that, I mean, they're not everywhere, but they are so important in, again, the idea of forgotten entities that have been crucial to the expeditions. And sadly, of course, you guess that some dogs died during the first expeditions, but they also died during the trip towards Antarctica and Adélie land. And the reason behind this is because seasickness, hypothermia. And why hypothermia? Because they were like on the front of the ship, just on the wooden floor. So when there were too much waves going on the boat, then the water, the icy waters, would go through the wood and on the dogs directly. And so these are not like healthy conditions for animals to survive. So sled dogs, tragic passengers to go to Antarctica. And I have an anecdote. So we talked about planes, right? So you can guess that France tried to build a lane to land on in so Dumont d'Urville station, and this was messy. The reason why it was messy, for two reasons. First, of course, scientists, biologists, Greenpeace, I'm talking about the 80s now, so said, what the hell are you doing? Like, there are animals living there. How are you going to build a lane? And, well, the way they built it, because they did it, it was dynamiting the neighboring islands and deporting the penguin colonies so that they could dynamite to level it. And once it was leveled, then to put the lane on. And so, I mean, it was quite the outrage at the time. We have an article that is exhibited also. And the irony of the situation, the reason why I'm telling this story, is because 85, the lane is built, right? So everything finished. The outrage is still there, I guess, but you can't, it's a far outcry now because it's done. You can't do anything about it. So congratulations, you've managed to arrive in Antarctica and in Adélie land. What's the difference between the first expeditions and the era of the French polar expeditions since like 47? So to live there, one thing that changed, communication. In the 1920s, there was no communication. They were alone on the continent. If they had died, we couldn't know it, except if we went there directly to see if there were corpses. And this is what happened with the Scots expedition that I talked to you about. They've been to where they died, and they found their corpses, and they found their notes, and that's how we know the story, is because they had written down what had happened. The fact that now they are able to communicate with mainland France, to communicate with their families, is a revolution. Like truly revolution for safety measures, and also just to not be alone there, because when you're there, solitude and darkness, specifically during the winter. Now that you can communicate, well, it's easier to survive there, let's say, but it's expensive. And because it's expensive, well, they found a quite interesting way to communicate with their families and with mainland France or the rest of the world. We call this lettres aux familles, family letters. The expedition members all sat down together, imagining it, of course, to write together what story they wanted to tell to their families. We have several examples again that can show you that. So tell how's life over there, what they are eating, what they are doing, and things appear quite quickly. One of the things that I've read is the importance of routine. Or they are working on their respective science experiments, or they are holding the ship afloat, I was going to say, holding the station, living, checking that everything is all right, mechanically speaking, taking care of the different chores. So it's a little village that have their own celebration, actually. You have the midwinter celebration, that's so specific to Antarctica, that's shared throughout all the continents and different stations in like different countries that they have once a year in the middle of winter, as you can guess. It's a little village living there. You live with only a few group of people, you don't see anyone else, you can't communicate, but I mean, or it's expensive, or you do it all together, or you send postcards, and this takes time. And postcards are a very, very important part of the archives that we have, because there are, I mean, two things. One, it was a very good way to communicate I mean, of the like larger public, because of the post stamps. The post stamps are very, very pretty. They've done like several each year, and it's been 70 years they're doing this. And apparently, it brings in quite some money also to finance the expeditions. It gives an idea of the work that's being done there, and the wildlife you can find, and the boats and ships and all this, and the helicopters. Like, this is all drawn in the post stamps. So you can make a history of the French polar expeditions through the post stamps, which is pretty cool also. They also have their own TV broadcast that they can watch, specifically for Adélie land, that like so brings apparently a synthesis of like everything that's happening in the world at that time. Radio also. So there are things to do, but again, if you don't have this routine, things can get quite quickly lonely. Last but not least, so science, jobs and raids. First of all, what do we do in Antarctica? What are the jobs? What are the sciences that are done there? So there needs to be a solid communication and cooperation between different jobs, because if you don't have the, I wouldn't say the authorization, but like the approval of the logistic parts, then you won't go to Antarctica, because you have lots of people that need to go there today at least, and at the time less, but still, and you can't go there anyhow and at any period that you want. There are a certain capacity for the station, and also you need food, there are so many different details and so many different aspects where scientists just cannot say, okay, I'm going there tomorrow. Like, no, that's not how it's happening. And for security measures also. So solid cooperation between these different jobs. But now that, again, imagine you're a scientist, you have the authorization to go to Antarctica, you're there, you're happy, you're alone, cool. Now, what sciences you can do? The three main sciences, at least that appear throughout like the archives that we have, are so biology, study of the local wildlife, and also then there's weather sciences, and this can include analyzing literally the weather, but also what the atmosphere is made of today, the temperatures, and also not from the sky but from space, analyzing like cosmic rays and these type of things. So there's very, very, very large span of different sciences that concern the upper layer, let's say, of Earth and outside the outer space. And then lastly but not least, there's glaciology. So glaciology is a very interesting subject because it's something that I didn't know of personally first, and also because it's a very, very recent, I wouldn't say like science in itself, but the revelations that have been pulled from its discoveries are fairly recent. And those are understanding how to build the history of climate. The reason for that is because glaciology, the main thing that people do when they are in Antarctica, they drill in the ice. And by drilling in the ice, they take different cylinders, right, to put up, and then by analyzing these cylinders, and more specifically the content and the bubbles, the air bubbles that are trapped in the ice, then, similarly to geology, deeper you go, the furthest in the past, you can see what the atmosphere was made of at that time in this area, which is the tool, from my understanding, that's enabled us to understand and try to study climate change as in today. Because by analyzing the past, you can guess what the future might hold. And they do this not only in Antarctica, of course, they do this also in North Pole and sometimes on top of mountains, but here we're talking about Antarctica. And so to do this, and other types of sciences, like studies of the ocean, seismic studies, auroral strips in the night sky, anyways. And to do a lot of studies, so there are a lot of it that's held to the coast, right, the coastline, but some of it, and glaciology is part of this, they need to go inside, on top of the plateau, to drill and to continue to explore also, because there's a lot of things that we don't know of. You do what we call raids, and raids are expeditions, basically. There are expeditions in two types of expeditions. There's logistic raids, so that you can go give the material and supplies to stations that are inland, right? So you can't do that by plane, so you have to take like 2 weeks, 10 days to do more than 1,000 kilometers from Dumont, for example, to Concordia. That's the first type, and after there's the scientific type, that has been the common ground for international collaboration, even during the most difficult times, for example during the Cold War, in which, despite the geopolitical tension at the time, the Soviet Union, the US, France and other countries were doing common scientific raids together, which is crazy to think of. And the reason why, and this is important, Antarctica is like this bubble, the safe space for science and peace in the world, despite all different challenges, is because of the Antarctic Treaty that I haven't spoken about yet. And so 1959, I think, something like that, or 56, in which basically it's a common treaty in which you cannot drill for profit, so you cannot mine there. You cannot do military experiments there, and the continent belongs to nobody. So how can France have a territory? They don't have a territory, they have a claimed territory, and some countries have like claimed territories that are accepted, let's say, because they discovered them and like obtained them before the Antarctic Treaty. So that's why like it's a bit fishy here. Other than that, because the land belongs to nobody, then it belongs to everybody, and so it's a land for peace and for science specifically, and it's amazing that it's like that. This explains also why we don't talk about Antarctica as much as the Arctic Circle, for example, where there's no such treaty that protects anything. So not the same thing. Important to know. Planes. I didn't talk about planes because I told you we're not using planes, at least in France, or at least helicopters, but planes, not really. However, the US, yes. And we have one picture of a plane, and the story is quite interesting, is a Hercules type of plane. I don't remember the name exactly, maybe I'll put it on screen also. And this plane was used in a collaboration also, I mean, in Antarctica generally speaking, but by the US to help with raids and supplies and support. And the picture that we have is, so in the French space in Adélie land, we see the French like weasels around, and it's just before it crashes, like literally the moment before the disaster. Nobody died, at least at that point, but the plane crashed, a minor crash, and they left it there because two reasons. One reason, the US decided that it was too dangerous to try to send people in the middle of nowhere to try to repair a plane and then just send it back. So they waited. They let time pass, and 17 years later, they decided, well, maybe it's less expensive to repair a plane and get it back rather than build a new one. So they were like, okay, we'll send people there. But what happened like between these times is that because of the winds and the erosion, well, the plane got nothing, it was fine, but ice and snow was layers upon layers on the plane. So 17 years after this, they had to dig up, because the only thing that they could see of the plane after all this time was the tip, so coming out of the ice. And again, you have pictures of it that you can find on the internet, and stories that tell this specific one that is quite interesting. And so this is, to conclude this story, is I think a fair testifying from nature of what Antarctica is. It's a place where things change slowly, but they do change inland, and things change very quickly on the coast because of climate change in one part, but also because the elements are quite different. But it is a land where we will never be welcome there as humans, because it's such a special place and so inhospitable, that it's amazing that we are able to do science there, and it's not an easy thing. So of course, like with technologies, it's more efficient, it's easier to go there, it's easier to live there, but still, it's still in the middle of nowhere, and if you have a problem, then it still might be fatal.